All right, welcome to our August History Happy Hour. My name is Ryan Nedrow. I'm the museum manager for the Heritage Alliance of Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. This program is in part, thankfully, constructed through the Heritage Alliance, as well as the Chester Inn Museum and the Historic Commission, the state, I'm losing my words, the Tennessee State Historic Commission. As for the topic, we are listening to Marshall Adesman talk about the Exchange Place. So the Exchange Place up in Kingsport, many of you familiar with, many of you will be familiar with. So welcome Marshall up to the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, sure, my pleasure. Don't want to hear from the public, Kelly. I can say that because they're two of my colleagues at Exchange Place. I am Marshall Adesman, and I am a volunteer at Exchange Place. And everybody who, if you've ever, have y'all, have anybody always, is anybody not familiar with Exchange Place? One lady over there. So the rest of you know who we are, maybe you've been there. If you've ever seen people working during festivals or whatever, we are all volunteers. And we'll get into that after a bit. But yes, I am one of the volunteers. I started, let's see, my wife and I retired and moved up here in 2009, and I went to a festival a fall festival in late 2009, and I just thought it was the greatest thing. Margaret Calco, if any of you know Margaret Calco, she was active then. Margaret is now 91, not that active. But back then she was still active, and she was dressed in costume, and she was great about answering questions as if it was 1850. And she just blew me away. And her final thing she said to me was, "Do you have any other questions?" I said, "Just one. How do I get to do what you're doing?" Be careful what you wish for. So here I am today after all these years. I am going to tell you a little bit about Exchange Place. I am not going to bore you with a lot of details. Feel free to ask questions. You can interrupt me if you want. As long as you stay awake, interrupt me. And after I'm done, and I'm not going to take tons of time, if you have any questions, and if not, I will have done my job. Exchange Place is what we call a living history farm. The reason we call it that is it's still historical. There are 7 buildings on the property that are sitting in the exact same place that they've been in since shortly after the War of 1812 and going up to before the war between the states. There are also a couple of buildings that are there that are original to Kingsport that date to the 1790s that were moved to Exchange Place. The Roseland building, I'm not sure when the Roseland building was moved there, in the 1980s maybe before. 1990?
When it was removed, yes.
But then sometimes it's good to have a wingman. But then the other building, which we now call the Borough Museum, was built around 1797 and was up on Orebank Road. If anybody knows anything about Kingsport, you know where Orebank Road is and where Highway 11W is, with that intersection. And that got moved about maybe not quite 10 years ago. I think it was 2016, something like that. That's about right. And they were both brought over in logs, reconstructed, and are sitting on the property. But they both date to the 1790s, which is the John Adams administration for historical perspective, and for personal perspective, it was my sophomore year in high school. And, well, it was. It took me a couple of years to get through it. Exchange Place, the land that we now know as Exchange Place, obviously long before there were buildings there, was just kind of sitting there. And the King of England, our good old friend George III, was very fond of giving people land. And he gave land to a man named Edmund Pendleton because he thought Edmund was a great guy. And little did he know, or Edmund know, that 20 years later, Edmund would become the president of the Second Continental Congress. But in 1756, Edmund got 3,000 acres. Now, Edmund lived in around where we would now call Fairfax, Virginia, nowhere near here. And to the best of our knowledge, he was never here. But he got this land. He said, fine. He got about 3,000 acres. It's after a long time, he told his nephews, he says, why don't you see if you could sell this land, 200-acre tracts, nothing less than 200 acres. And they sold 3. They got 3 acres sold. And so that most of the land was just sort of sitting there. Well, after the War of 1812, so we're fast forwarding more than 50 years. After the War of 1812, a man named John Gaines came by. John Gaines had fought in the War of 1812, and he had some money in his pocket, and he was looking for a place to live in Tennessee. He was from Virginia. He was looking for a place to live in Tennessee. Now, I have to digress for just a second. I found this information here, that the land that is now Exchange Place has been, at one time or another, part of 4 different counties of Virginia. And again, we're going way back. It's been part of North Carolina, was part of the good old state of Franklin, was part of the territory of the United States of America south of the River Ohio, all in caps, and finally Sullivan County in the state of Tennessee. So we have the 6 flags over Texas. We could do 5 of them. We could do 5. We ought to think about that. Do a 5 flags at Exchange Place. So John Gaines has this money. He's from Virginia, but he decides he wants a presence in Tennessee, and he sees this land, and he starts buying up some land. John bought about 2,100 acres, I think a little, give or take, about 2,100 acres, and he started developing this property over the next 40 years, and he and his family lived there. And some of those buildings when you come out, and I don't say if, I say when you come out to Exchange Place, some of those buildings are original John Gaines buildings. The smokehouse, pretty sure the smokehouse is a John Gaines. The schoolhouse, which is a blue building that has a ramp that goes up about 45 degrees. That we're pretty sure that's a John Gaines building. Not sure about the main house, but it's likely that at least some of that is his. Anyway, so John Gaines and his wife and family are living there, happy as clams, and then in the 1840s, that changes. We think that John he's getting older, he's thinking, I'm not gonna last very long, and maybe I wanna be buried in my home state of Virginia. Now, this is strictly speculation on my part. We have no records. It's not like he kept a diary or had a Facebook account. He did not keep really good records. So I'm just speculating, figuring his age and all that. So John says, all right, what am I going to do with this farm? So he gets flyers, prints up flyers, kind of like you got here, but a little different, and tacks them up. And it says, I got a place for you, come and see me. So a man named John Pendleton comes to see him. Mr. Pendleton, no, I'm wrong. Am I wrong? I'm confusing my old people here. Preston. Got my P's mixed up, sorry. John Preston comes to see this farm. And he rides around and he thinks, this is a pretty nice place. Obviously it's got some buildings on it. It's got a creek that runs right in there, so plenty of water for people and for animals and for anybody else who wants to drink. He says, this looks pretty good. And he sees something on a tree. And you may have seen this or you may have heard about it, but something is written on a tree. Now, nowadays, we wouldn't get excited about that because we would see some flyer about us, a sale coming up or a lost cat or something like that. But they didn't do that back then. So, what's written on a tree? And it's not something that's tacked up. It's actually carved on a tree. It said, D. Boone killed a bar on this tree 1775. Now, sometimes we have school program in April and May every year. We usually have 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade kids. And when we do this program, we dress in period clothes and we are the family. So on the days that I'm in the house and I am Mr. Preston, I ask the kids, do they know who D. Boone was? And they don't know. Now, all of us who saw Fess Parker, we know who he was.
He needs a Facebook page.
Excuse me?
He needs a
He needs a
Facebook page.
Facebook page.
Or Twitter.
So we know that D. Boone was Daniel Boone. And the story that I've been told was this. Daniel was approached by a man who had lots and lots of money and lots of acreage, but was not a happy man because he wanted to be selling these acreages for people to buy some, several acres and put up their farms. And people weren't buying. Why weren't they buying? It was nothing but trees. They couldn't see what they were going to get. It's just trees and trees and trees and trees. So he says, Daniel, why don't you take that trusty axe of yours and make me a pathway? Chop down these trees and make me a pathway so that a man can take his horse and he can walk along and he can say, I don't like that, I don't like that. Oh, I like that spot right over there. That looks great. I could put my farm right over there. Daniel says, I can do that, but I'm going to need a lot of help. So can I hire some guys? The guy said yes. So Daniel hired 31 men, and they called them Axemen. They were not X-Men. They were Axemen. See, I can't even tell that joke to the kids. The Axemen all carried big axes, and their job was to chop down the trees and make a pathway. The story goes that in 1775 they had been chopping away and they got as far as where Exchange Place is now, and they were going to continue going up until they got up to what is now Kentucky. They got to a certain spot. This is it for the night, guys. Let's knock it off. Let's have some, we'll have something to eat. We'll have a few Triscuits or whatever, and we'll go to sleep. We'll wake up in the morning. In the morning, they're stretching, getting themselves ready. Here comes a bear out of the woods. The bear sees all these guys. The bear is as excited as he can be. Look at all these. I can kill these men. And I would have enough food to last me for weeks and weeks and weeks. This will be Christmas, everything. So the bear attacks. Daniel, being the leader, fights back, supposedly kills the bear. And then he's all proud of himself. So he puts on a tree, D. Boone. He didn't spell his last name right, by the way. His schooling was not really very good. So he forgot the E at the end of his name. Killed a bar, spelled killed wrong, but he called it a bar. That's how he talks, so we'll give him, we'll let that slide. On this tree, this tree, instead, forgot the N, 1775. And then they went on their way and continued making their path. I like to say it's probably the first example of Twitter, but I'm not sure if that's right. Anyway, here comes 60-some years later, here comes Mr. Preston, and he sees this on the property, and he says, this is not only great farmland, this is historic land, I gotta have this. So he goes to Mr. Gaines. He says, Mr. Gaines, I got me an ideal. I have land in Virginia. You want to go back to Virginia. Why don't we do this? I'll give you that land. You give me this land. Nobody has to write any checks, pull out the credit cards, nothing. Let's just make a deal. Mr. Gaines says, you got it. They shake hands. And so what did they do? They exchanged land. The 3 reasons we're called Exchange Place. That is probably the most important. I'll tell you the other 2 in a little bit. But now Mr. Preston now has the land. He in turn gives it to his son as a wedding gift, great wedding gift, I got a set of luggage. Move out! It's true. Mr. Preston gave it to his son as a wedding gift. And at that point, a Preston or a Preston descendant lived on that property. I think it was from 1845 until 1970. The last Preston descendant was a lady named Mrs. Coffey, and she passed away right there in the house, and that was in 1970. So this land had been Preston land all this time. Now the Preston family still lives in Abingdon, Virginia. In fact, the original, we have that D. Boone, Kill the Bar, etc. We have a replica up in the house. We tell the kids it's original, but we tell adults it's just a replica. But the original is in a house in Abingdon. At one time, that house, I was told, used to open up when Abingdon would do their open house thing. They don't do that anymore. So I'd love to go in there just to see the thing. Anyway, during the war between the states, the schoolhouse, which is a blue building, it's got a ramp, was used for Confederate soldiers who had been wounded, and they were ministered to. But the nicer house, the guest room of the main house, was used for officers. The Prestons, especially Mrs. Preston, was a die-hard Confederate. I just thought I'd throw that in there. Mr. Preston did have slaves for a time. In 1850, now we have one of my colleagues at Exchange Place, one of my fellow volunteers, would dispute me in this, but most of my information, this is just a little bit of it. There was a book written in 1984, I think, by two of our volunteers who both unfortunately passed away, Suzanne Burrow and Myra Dean Bumpers, and I don't know if you know any either of those ladies. I knew them both. They were both wonderful. We missed them. Anyway, they wrote a book. They did a research on the history of Exchange Place, and this is where I'm getting this information from. So, although my colleague would probably possibly dispute it, we have been told from this book that Mr. Preston freed his slaves in 1856. If you all know even a little bit about history, you know that Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect January 1st of 1863. So Preston was 6+ years ahead of Abe Lincoln. None of the slaves left. They all stayed because, where are they going to go? It's not like nowadays, oh yeah, I got relatives up in Oregon, I can go stay with them. No. So he gave them all plots of land, and they grew things and harvested them, and then they would bring it to what was at one time the general store. It was kind of the food city of its time. But when Mr. Preston got it, when Gaines had it, it was a general store for the whole neighborhood. But when Mr. Preston got it, he says, no, this will just be food for our people. And so they would bring their corn or wheat or whatever it was that they were growing, and they would give it to him, and he would pay them in return. So you can still see in the store, if you come out, when you come out, in the general store there's a cut down tree. It must have been a pretty big tree, but it stands about this tall now, and it's been hollowed out. It was hollowed out by Preston. And so they would throw their stuff in there, and if it came up this high, he knew to give them so much, and this high was more, and this high was more, and this high was more, that kind of thing. So you can still see that. So the slaves were freed, they stayed, and that is how they scratched out a living, was growing and getting paid by Preston. All right, Mrs. Coffey, the last Preston descendant, died in 1970. She had no heirs. What are we going to do with this property? We got these great old buildings, and at the time there were 62 acres. We've since sold 3 back to the city, so we have 59. But what are we going to do with this property? I think there was a fear that somebody would grab it, maybe the city, turn it into a waste treatment plant, or some business would come in and tear down all these businesses and put up a car lot or a Walgreens or something, who knows. So the Netherland Inn, now everybody familiar with the Netherland Inn in Kingsport? Yes, okay. You guys know the Netherland Inn? The Netherland Inn was already around and they had their group of volunteers and they said, we can't let this go to waste. Let's get our hooks on it and make it part of the Netherland Inn Association. So they went to the Preston family and they worked out a deal. The Preston family gave 7.5 acres to what was then the Netherland Inn Association, plus a lot of family artifacts and family memorabilia. Later on, they actually were nice enough to give another 5 acres, but then they said, no, if you want more, you're going to have to buy it. And so, the people who started getting involved with this said, all right, we're going to have to raise some money. So we started having festivals. Now I've given you a flyer for the Fall Festival, which is coming up the last weekend in September, the 27th and 28th, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday we will open at 10 in the morning and stay open till 5. Sunday we'll be opening at noon and stay open till 5. We do this every year. This is going to be the 53rd year. We've only missed 1 year since it started, and that was because of good old COVID. When we came back in 2021, that's right, wasn't it, 21? The first event we held was the Fall Festival. So this is the 53rd edition of the Fall Festival, and the very first one was the very first fundraising event that Exchange Place did. 1972, 71, something like that. We hold these festivals because we are looking to maintain the buildings, make sure the animals are fed and taken care of, keep the property looking nice, because we are not, emphasized, not owned by the state, the county, the city, any wealthy person that you can think of. We are strictly private, on our own, just like the Netherland Inn. The association, by the way, is now called the Netherland Inn-Exchange Place Association. They could have come up with a better name. All the people, as I mentioned, are volunteers. Nobody gets paid, which includes, at least for the time being, the people who are our caretakers. Everybody does it because they enjoy Exchange Place, they have a love for it, and we're also all a little attached. So, and you can get, yeah, absolutely. Mark and Sarah, by the way, are colleagues of mine at Exchange Place. Anyway, so the very first thing that happened was the Fall Festival. We have since gotten to where we have 5 public events. We had a Spring Garden Fair at the end of April, which is always the largest event that we hold, unless it rains. So we always pray for good weather. Or somebody's going to put up a dome over the facility. Hasn't happened yet. We have an event in the summertime, which is mostly for kids and is sponsored by the Hamlet Dobson Funeral Home, called Farm Fest, part of Kingsport's Fun Fest. Then we have our Fall Festival in September. We have a great storytelling event in October called Witches Wind, in which we usually get 4 or 5 regional storytellers to come out and just, and they don't try to scare the bejesus out of you, but they do tell some really good stories. And it's right inside the buildings, except maybe there'll be one outside. Sorry. And then we have a Christmas event. The Spring and Fall Festival are 2-day events. The Farm Fest in the summertime, the Witches Wine is a 2-day event. The Farm Fest and Christmas in the Country, which is the last event of the year, the first Saturday in December, that's just 1 day. And we do those basically to raise money to keep the place going. As I said, we feed the animals. we still have quite a few animals. We have, let's see, we have a cow, 2 horses, a couple of pigs, I don't know how many sheep, 7 or 8, right? Something like that, 7 or 8 sheep. Cats wander in and out all the time. But they live on the property 365 days a year, and they all like to eat a couple times a day, except for the cats, who eat all the time. And but the cats usually supply their own food. And the money that we raise at these festivals takes care of those animals, takes care of their food, takes care of vet visits. As I said, we don't get any public money unless we write a grant. We wrote a grant to the city some years ago, and we actually got it. So we're very excited about that. But we've also written grants, and it's the way it is with grants. It doesn't always happen. So that's why we have these festivals. But we are not. And I try to emphasize this because there's a lot of people, even people who've written letters to the editor and said, well, Exchange Place is owned by the city or the county. No, it is not. Now, getting back, if I had read my notes, the Fall Festival started in 1971. This isn't very important, so I'm not going to mention it. What else do we have at Exchange Place? We have a garden. Among our volunteers are a group of master gardeners who come out once a week, sometimes more, and they plant things. Among the things they have planted are potatoes, tomatoes, I cannot read my handwriting, cabbage, leeks, cucumbers, carrots, beets, radishes, and okra. Sweet potatoes, that's what that word is. So those things all get planted, so they'll do 3 or 4 or 5 this year and 3 or 4 or 5 next year. We also have a group of youngsters called the Junior Apprentices. I mention this for a reason. A lot of us are a little on the older side. You're one of the younger members, Mark and Sarah, one of the younger members, and Mark is just retired. When I came, I was like the 3rd youngest, and I had just turned 60. So we thought of this a few years ago. We need to have some younger people, and we worked out a deal. So we've started bringing in these junior apprentices. They are youngsters between the ages of 12 and 18. They generally have an interest in history, an interest in preservation, an interest in learning old ways, and they pay a small fee every year, and they get to have classes out at Exchange Place, I think at least once a month, to learn all these different things. They take trips. Recently they went to the Museum of Appalachia. Is that where they went? I think so. And yeah, they went there. I know they've been up in Virginia. They've been to They went to Winston-Salem in North Carolina, Old Salem. They try to do a trip every year. And then during the festivals, you'll definitely see them because, first of all, they're dressed in period clothes, whereas a lot of us are not, especially when it's hot. And they'll be doing different things, chores around the house, around the farm. So they're in the main house helping to cook meals. They're in the cook's cabin making popcorn or doing other things, decorating. They are chopping wood, working in the garden. But they're all learning the old ways. This is what we're still trying to do. Our mission as volunteers with Exchange Place right now is to make sure that these youngsters and then their youngsters have something to go to so that they can come and talk to all of your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren over the years and tell them about Exchange Place. Well, I started when I was 12 years old in 2019, and let me tell you what it was like then. So we have, I don't know how many kids she's got, 30 or so. I know she's usually pretty full. There's a waiting list of youngsters to get in there. But they're learning the old ways, and they're learning the history of Exchange Place, so that when you come to the Fall Festival, and you see one of these youngsters, what can you tell me about Exchange Place? They'll rattle it off. They'll know, they'll at least know something about a specific area, but they'll probably know a little bit about most of Exchange Place. I'm not sure that I know anything else that I can tell you. We have a fall festival coming up, as I mentioned, September 27 and 8. Our Witch's Wine will be October 17, 18, 18, 19. It's a Friday and a Saturday. It's a wonderful event. Oh, let me get back to the festival. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg to get in. For those of you who happen to be over 12, and I know some of you are over 12, it'll cost you $5 to get in. If you bring anybody who is under the age of 12, there is no charge for that person or persons. And you can stay all day, as long as you want. There will be lots of things to see in the houses, lots of things to see along the campus. There will be vendors selling a variety of heritage crafts. There's people who make their own soap, for instance. There's people who I happen to know a lady who makes her own note cards. So you don't have to go to Hallmark and buy a note card. You can get one that was handmade in her workroom. And I can still hear her cussing while she's making some. There are different vendors selling a variety of different things, plants. We have, when we do the Christmas in the Country, the first Saturday in December, there is a lady named Vicki Price who is famous for her greenery. And there are people who literally pay the $5 at the gate, they go right to Vicki's area, they buy all the greenery they want, and they leave. They're happy to pay the admission charge just so they can get in early and get Vicki's stuff. But there are people who do that with soap, and there are people who do that with various other heritage crafts. There's a lady who does some wonderful crocheted items. And I know she's going to be out there in the fall festival. So you'll have these vendors, and you'll have music. We have music, starts Saturday at 10. The Kingsport Community Band always takes the first slot. They play the Star Spangled Banner, and then they play a selection of wonderful music. I like to be at the gate at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, because then I can hear them playing, and they play all sorts of wonderful stuff, and it's not surprising to see me singing and dancing along to that. You don't want to hear me sing, but you don't want to see me dance either. So that's coming up in September. We got the Witch's Wine. If you're interested in the Witch's Wine, and as I said, those are going to be Halloween-ish stories. And if you're wondering, are they going to be really scary if you wanted to bring a youngster? No, they're not really scary. There's a Halloween theme. There might be ghosts, there might be witches, but nobody gets eaten or anything like that. There'll be 4 or 5 of them. Tickets are on sale beginning at the fall festival, and they usually don't last very long. There have been times when, after close of business, the fall festival Sunday at 5, we've got a couple dozen tickets left as well. We only sell 144, is that right? I think that's right, per night. There's that event, and then there's the Christmas in the Country, which is the first Saturday in December. And then we take a break, we shut down, and we're back at it in the spring. I've rambled on long enough. I know I've forgotten things, but I'm sorry. Does anybody have any questions about anything whatsoever?
What is the exact time frame you focus on for the living history?
We say 1850, so we don't get up to the Civil War. We know that the house was occupied at that point by the Prestons, and we always, even though Gaines was there for a good 30 years, we pretty much concentrate on the Preston family because they were there for 125 years, give or take. So we concentrate on probably the 1840s into the very early 1850s. We have a barn. If you're wandering around and you're looking to see where, say, our horses and our donkey are, they're in the barn, which is towards the back, and we know that barn was the last of the original buildings. It was built in 1851. And the reason we know this is Mr. Preston probably wanted a barn, probably needed more room for the animals, but he didn't have the time to build it himself. Otherwise, he was going to be taking away from other things he and the boys needed to do around the farm. So he subcontracted, hired a local person, and we found when we started going through things in the 1970s, we found a bill of sale, and it was $293.25, something. It was the $290 range. And that's how much it cost to build a big old barn back in 1851. So we say, well, 1851, that's kind of our main year there. But we look at before, we look at a little bit after. But yeah, that is the place that we look. Anybody else? Let me say one other thing. I apologize in advance. There is a commercial. I've already told you about Exchange Place, but there's another commercial. I have a flyer over here that has absolutely nothing to do with Exchange Place, but I have written a book. It's a novel. I've written a couple books, but this is a novel. It's almost, well, I researched it for 10 years, but it's only been out for not quite 2 years. It has nothing to do with Exchange Place, but the book does take place in this area. It takes place in Northeast Tennessee. It takes place in the early 50s. And if you or somebody you know is interested in baseball, minor league baseball specifically, but baseball in general, please feel free to take a flyer. I'm not selling any books, but because I don't have any left. But the publisher still has probably lots of them. So if you thought you might be interested, please feel free to take a flyer. Again, I apologize for doing the commercial, but we all watch TV and everybody has commercials. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marshall. And thank you all for joining us for another History Happy Hour. Have a good evening.